Surface water comes from the Salt and Verde rivers, the Colorado River, and then we also have another surface water supplied through the Roosevelt Water Conservation District, which is I won't talk about that much because it's a little confusing, but we have a few different sources of surface water. 57% of our water supplies in Chandler come from the Salt and Verde, and about 37% come from the Colorado River. And then the balance, whatever, 6-7% comes from, on average, it changes year to year, but on average it's about 6 to 7% groundwater. And again, I mentioned we try to use groundwater very sparingly because it is a finite supply. When we do use groundwater, we replenish it. So Chandler is located in what's called an active management area. Under the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, there was essentially a bunch of regulations that were passed that say we want to make sure that we're using groundwater in a very sustainable way. So if you're pumping groundwater, then you need to also be putting whatever you're pumping out, you need to be putting it back in. So we're always trying to manage, if we pump it out, we have recharge facilities that we take surface water supplies, not groundwater, but surface water supplies, and we have multiple different ways of putting it back in the aquifer, but some are big recharge basins. Some are what are called aquifer injection wells. So the same wells that pump the water out, you can actually reverse the direction and pump water back into the aquifer through those specific type of wells. So we're always trying to manage the groundwater that we're pumping. But this just gives you a general idea of kind of the percentages of where our supplies come from. Like I mentioned in Chandler, we do have a very significant volume of reclaimed water. So our reclaimed water in Chandler is used for industrial uses. So we have some large industrial customers that the water quality of Class A plus effluent, perfectly fine for what they need for industrial use, so that's great. Every time we can use reclaimed water to serve a customer, it takes pressure off of our drinking water supplies. So we want to always be using our reclaimed water whenever it's an appropriate use, right? We also use it for aquifer recharge. We use it to serve urban irrigation needs, so like parks, schools. Sometimes you see lakes, so I don't know how many of you are from Chandler, but if you drive around in Chandler, you'll see some areas that are really, really green and there's a ton of grass, and you look at that and you think, oh, they're wasting water, right? And you see tons of lakes too, right? In those same areas that are really, really green, there's lots of lakes. Well, there's actually a really good reason for that, because the way that Chandler decided to develop as a city, and this was an infrastructure and strategic decision, is we decided we were going to make the investment in building out an entire distribution system. So that means all the pumps and pipes that are underground in order to deliver water. We built a whole second distribution system. So we have one distribution system underground that serves water to your tap in your home, right? And that's drinking water, and it doesn't mix with reclaimed water. In order to have customers that we're serving reclaimed water to and to really maximize our ability to put that water supply to use, not only do you have to build wastewater reclamation facilities, which are very expensive pieces of infrastructure, but you also have to put all the pumps and pipes and the network of distribution underground, underneath the roads and everywhere to actually get that water to who you want to deliver it to. That's a very expensive infrastructure investment, and it's a very unique thing in Chandler. Most cities do not have that kind of infrastructure underground to be able to deliver their reclaimed water directly to a customer. So you are hearing lots of talk in the media about some cities want to take their reclaimed water, build these very advanced purification facilities, and then put that supply back into their drinking water system. That's been talked about as advanced purification. Some people call it direct potable reuse. I want to just be clear, that's not what we do in Chandler. Some cities are talking about that, but that's not what we do. What we do is we treat our wastewater and we deliver it through a whole separate set of pipes to specific customers that they don't need drinking water quality. They're perfectly happy with Class A effluent. So that's a big difference. We have about our reclaimed water supply, and a lot of our reclaimed water is used for an exchange that we have with the Gila River Indian community, which gives us access to some of their Colorado River supplies. So it's helpful that for a lot of agricultural production, effluent is a perfectly fine water quality to use if you're irrigating a field that's growing alfalfa, for example, that's going to be fed to cows. They don't use Class A effluent on crops that are for human consumption. So if you're growing lettuce, you're not going to irrigate that field with reclaimed water. But if you're growing mostly forage crops and those sorts of things, reclaimed water is a perfectly acceptable way to irrigate that. So because Chandler borders the Gila River Indian community, we have a really mutually beneficial partnership with them where we send them a lot of our reclaimed water, 67% of it, to be specific, and in return, they give us some of their Colorado River water. And so we take their Colorado River water, deliver it to our water treatment plant, which goes into the drinking water system, and it's a very mutually beneficial exchange. We don't have enough customers to...
Just wiggle.
Yeah.
Not
wiggle.
you, but... No.
We don't have, we have so much reclaimed water in Chandler, we don't have enough customers to use it all. But we want to make sure we're putting it to its best use. So the best way for the portion of our reclaimed water that we can't use by serving to direct customers, the best way to use that is to find another customer that's outside of our service area who can use it, and then trade for a different water supply. So that's how we do that. Okay, I better stand over here because I'm not going to know which way to look. So just to kind of orient you to the watersheds, and I'm probably already like talking too much, so I'll have to speed up here. But the Salt and Verde watershed this is a blow up of this tiny little area that's in brown at the bottom, right? But the light blue is the watershed of the Salt River. So any rain or snow that falls there is going to run off into the Salt River. And then the darker blue is the watershed of the Verde River. So any rain or snow that falls there, it's going to run off into that river. Both of those rivers come together just above Phoenix. And there's a series of reservoirs that are managed by SRP. So all of that water, and it's quite a bit of water, gets stored in 6 different reservoirs, and they're all managed kind of conjunctively. They're used for hydropower production, and so those reservoirs, they let out a certain amount of water to use for generating hydropower, and then believe it or not, they actually pump some of that water back up into the reservoirs again because they don't necessarily need to deliver the water for a customer, but they want to keep the water moving for hydropower production. But those are our water supplies. This is the yellow area here, which is a fairly small area actually, is the limitation of where that water can be used. So with surface water rights, in general, the right to the water, the right to use the water is tied to the land. And so there's literally over 100 years of legal agreements and compacts, and water law is very complicated. But basically, the way that it worked is that in this yellow area, all of the landowners back when Roosevelt Dam was built, they said, okay, we don't want floods, and we want to be more drought proof. We want to have a more secure water supply. So we want to have a way of storing water, both to protect us from floods and also to be a more consistent water supply so that it's not feast or famine in dry years or wet years, right? So they put up their land as collateral, their farmland. It was all agricultural land back then. They put up their farmland as collateral for the federal government to give a loan to build these dams. And so because they effectively paid for, with putting up their land as collateral, they paid for the dams to get built. So this land is the only land that can use that water. And it's all part of the Kent Decree and decreed water rights. So it's just important to know that even though the water falls up here in the watershed, it gets stored in dams, but it can only be used here. And that's why other areas, even of the Phoenix area, don't have access to surface water from the SRP system. So I like to throw this slide in because this is a water resource manager's dream to see the news, putting pictures on the news that talks about just how we have so much water that we literally can't even store it all. It's actually physically spilling over the dams because there's just so much. We don't have enough space to keep it all. So this is just this past year in March that we had a huge winter and had a really historic runoff into the SRP reservoirs to the point that SRP said, oh, we got to start releasing some of this water, and it just flowed down what's normally a dry salt riverbed, right? Okay, so switching to the Colorado River. Again, this is SRP. Most of where Chandler's water comes from. The rest of it, the majority of the rest of it comes from the Colorado River. So it's helpful to see the difference in the scale of the watershed, right? The previous one that I showed you for the SRP water, it's all within Arizona. It's a specific watershed within Arizona, and it's only allowed to be used in a very, very, very small piece of the Phoenix metro area, right? Polar opposite with Colorado River. The watershed of the Colorado River spans 7 states and 2 countries. So we're talking big, big watershed, lots of water users, 40 million people across 7 states, and 2 countries that rely on this river. And I think you've probably all seen in the news that it's stressed, right? So the 2 major reservoirs of the Colorado River is Lake Powell, which is on the Arizona-Utah border, and Lake Mead, which kind of forms the border between Arizona and Nevada. So the Colorado River is, it's far away from central Arizona, right? It doesn't run right through the middle of the Phoenix area. So how do we get Colorado River into central Arizona? If you see this blue line here that kind of comes all the way over from the western border with California and snakes through central Arizona, through the Phoenix area, and then ends all the way down in Tucson. That blue line is the Central Arizona Project canal, aqueduct. It's a 336-mile canal. They like to describe it as a feat of engineering. It's one of the last major federal reclamation projects to be built. And it is what brings us our Colorado River water. So I could go into some of the engineering marvels about this piece of infrastructure, but I don't think we have time, so I'm going to skip it. So this might be getting a little too technical, but so I'm just going to cover it really fast. But this graph is what water managers who rely on the Colorado River are always looking at, okay? So this green line is what was happening in the, what we call snow water equivalent. So that's a measurement of how much water is in the snow that's going to run off into the river. So in the winter, we're always watching what's happening with the snowpack. Do we have good snowpack? Good snowpack means it's going to be a good water year, right? But we also have to look at, well, how much of the water that's in this, how much of the snow is actually water that we can expect that's going to end up in the river. Some of it sublimates into the atmosphere. Some of it gets sucked up by the really dry soils. So we don't always get all of the water in the snow into the river, right? So the blue line is what happened in 2023. That's really good. The purple line was the average from 1991 to 2020, and we call it the 30-year average. And so you can see that on the Colorado River, we finally, for the first time in 20 years, had a really, really, really good water year on the Colorado River. That's helpful because things were kind of getting to a scary point before that. So that bought us a few years to kind of have everybody work collaboratively together to figure out how we're going to manage this river. So groundwater supplies. Chandler is also very uniquely positioned amongst valley cities that back in the 80s and 90s, when the Central Arizona Project was built, and all of a sudden there was this, prior to the Central Arizona Project aqueduct bringing CAP water into Central Arizona, Colorado River water, there was a lot of groundwater pumping going on. A lot of people didn't have access to SRP. There was a lot of groundwater pumping. Once the Colorado River water came in, a lot of cities built new surface water treatment plants to take that water and deliver that, and they just kind of decided, no, we don't need our groundwater wells anymore, right? So we're just gonna let those go. They're very expensive to maintain, and you can't really just let them sit and not use them. You have to exercise them now and then, and it's complicated to keep them if you're not gonna use them. So Chandler made a decision back then, even though we have a surface water treatment plant, one to treat SRP water, one to treat Colorado River water, they're on different canal systems. We're going to keep maintaining our wells anyways. We're going to keep exercising them and using them because we feel like it provides important resiliency and redundancy in case there's ever a shortage in surface water supplies. We can always turn to our wells. So Chandler has 32 active wells, 3 new wells that are in progress, 2 sites that are reserved and in the future planning stages. And we've spent decades of careful maintenance and planning to make sure that those wells are available to us when we need them. So we literally could turn off both of our surface water treatment plants, no surface water, turn all of our wells, and we could run the entire city on wells. That's very unique to Chandler. Not that we want to do it. That's not our plan. We're hoping that we'll have plenty of surface water, but it's really just like a emergency backup resiliency plan. So I talked about this a little bit already. I'll skip through it quickly, but I just want to point out a couple things. You see these purple signs all around the parks that say, do not drink, no beber. This is because there's grass at that park or school or whatever the area is that's being irrigated with reclaimed water. It's actually fairly safe, but like the regulations say we have to alert the public that it's reclaimed water. So this is an aerial view of our airport water reclamation facility, just one of the 3 water reclamation facilities that Chandler has invested in. And then this is a beautiful picture of Veterans Oasis Park. If you haven't been there, highly recommend you visit. Very peaceful. Don't go in July, but or go very early in the morning. But it's a very peaceful place. There's these huge recharge basins that most people walking by on their morning walk would never even know what the purpose is that they serve. But what we're doing is we're taking surface water supplies, extra, that we don't need, and we're recharging it through these basins that have been very carefully designed by smart geologists and hydrologists that are designed to help the water percolate down into the aquifer very quickly. So specific types of soils and making sure that the amount of time that water sits in that basin is minimal because we want to reduce surface evaporation. But our major customers for reclaimed water, HOA common areas where you see lots of grass, golf courses, parks, schools. We do have some large commercial industrial users. And then of course I mentioned the Gila River Indian community and the recharge facilities. This just gives you an idea of how extensive the reclaimed infrastructure is in Chandler. So the northern part of Chandler, kind of north of Pecos Road, that's the older part. We hadn't made that decision to start building out the infrastructure at the point when that part of the city developed. But as the southern part of the city developed, we made a big commitment to putting in all of those pumps and pipes underground. So this whole area, if you're located in this area and you come to the city and say, hey, I want to use reclaimed water, we have the infrastructure to deliver it to you in that part of the city. So future challenges, and I've mentioned a couple of these, but it's going to be in the news. It's not going away anytime soon just because we had one really good year on the Colorado River. Unfortunately, one good year on the Colorado River is not enough to kind of pull us out of the 20 bad years, right? We're going to need more than one to get us to a place where those reservoirs are healthy again. So we're everyone who relies on Colorado River, we're looking at adapting to a future where there's less water. And so we have to plan for that. There's a bunch, so what are we doing to plan for it? There's a bunch of different regional partnerships that are in the study phase right now. Some of them are infrastructure projects that provide more flexibility to move water around between the SRP and CAP systems. There's one very large project that's still in the study phase. We don't know yet where it will go. It takes a long time to move these through the feasibility studies, but there's a proposal to both move and modify the dam for Bartlett Dam, which would give us more storage space. So those pictures you saw of the news showing all the water flowing down the Verde River, or the Salt River bed, it's great. It means we're having a good water year, but on the other hand, it's like, oh, that water is just going away and we didn't get to save it, right? We really want to keep that water and store it in reservoirs. We don't want it to just run down the riverbed and go off to somewhere far away. So that project would help us be able to store more of that water because we really don't have a lot of storage capacity on the Verde River. On the Salt River, we have tons. On the Verde River, not so much. So that's when we have a really big winter, we usually can't store all of the water in the Verde. So some of these other things, we're always looking at how to maintain our aquifers in a sustainable way. Costs are going up, so that means all around the Phoenix metro area, people are going to start to see their water rates increase. That's a challenge that we have to manage. Demand management, as we increasingly ask people to use less water in their landscapes, right? Take out your grass, put in xeriscape, be water wise. Those are all really important things, but the more water wise we get, the less buffer there is when there's a shortage, right? If there's a shortage, we can say, okay, not that we plan to anytime soon, but the option is there to say, hey, we want you guys to just water your grass once a week. If everybody's already taken out their grass, there isn't that buffer room to kind of help with demand management. That's a challenge. And then
if you give people incentives, then people convert.
We have some very new, exciting incentives coming up in Chandler. So we already have a bunch of incentives.
Oh.
We have grass removal incentives. We have smart controller incentives. We have a very robust conservation program with incentives. But we have some even better incentives coming that are going to council in September. So more on that. I think I'm getting close here. I'm getting towards the end. What makes Chandler unique? We have a very, very diverse supply of water. So we have surface water supplies from 3 different rivers, Salt Verde, Colorado. Having that diversity of supply gives us a lot of flexibility, right? If there's a surface water shortage on the Colorado River, we have a different surface water supply that can help kind of pick up some of that slack. Or if there's a surface water supply on the Salt and Verde system, we have other surface water supplies from the Colorado. So having a diverse portfolio of water supplies, very, very helpful. We use 100% of our reclaimed water. We've really made a huge investment in building out that distribution system and investing in those water reclamation plants. We use 30,000 acre feet of reclaimed water every year in Chandler for direct customers or the exchange with the Gila River Indian community. 30,000 acre feet, that's the same amount of water we get from the Colorado River. So just to give you an idea of the scale, it's a huge, huge benefit in Chandler because if we didn't have that 30,000 acre feet of water to use for reclaimed water, we would need to have that in drinking water supplies. And then we would need a lot more surface water supplies than we actually need right now. So there's just been decades of infrastructure investments. We have one interconnected system. All of our entire city of Chandler is connected through different pipes underground. So even though we have 2 different surface water treatment plants, we have multiple different pressure zones. It's very complex the way water moves underground. However, very thoughtful infrastructure planning was done to say, well, we want to make sure that if we ever have a shortage on the Colorado River, that the area of our city that right now receives water through a surface water treatment plant from the CAP canal, and right now that's delivered to a certain area, we want to make sure that we can deliver water from a different source to that area. So we have pipes where directions can switch and one section can serve another section and it's all interconnected. That's very unique to Chandler. I think I've mentioned most of these things. We also have 6 recharge facilities, which is important because it allows us to meet state regulatory requirements for whatever groundwater pumping we're doing. You have to have the facilities that you can deliver surface water supplies to put that water back underground. So what are we already doing? We have a drought plan. We have an internal drought team in the city that meets and evaluates any additional steps that need to be taken as part of our drought plan. We have robust conservation education programs and rebate programs, those incentives that you were talking about. We're doing that. We're up in the ante on some of those as well. We have extensive stormwater management and dry wells around the city that make sure that we're capturing all of the stormwater that falls in the city and directing it straight through these things that are called dry wells, where it's like a short circuit straight down to the aquifer, right? You don't have to waste time percolating through the soil. The stormwater is designed to go to these dry wells where it just takes the water straight down to the aquifer. We've been doing a lot of groundwater modeling to make sure we've got sustainable management for our groundwater supplies. We have a tiered rate structure in the water rates, which helps to encourage conservation, right? For those people who are using the most water, if you're using high volumes of water, you're going to pay more for those higher volumes, because we want you to think about, do you really need to flood your entire yard every single day, or can you get away with a little bit less, right? We want you to feel that in the rates. We have a 100-year assured water supply designation, which just means that the Arizona Department of Water Resources has sort of put their stamp on the fact that we have all the water supplies we need and all the infrastructure we need to be able to meet the demands of our customers in our service area. Not just today, and not just with our current demands, but all of our projected build-out demands for 100 years. So it's a very, very rigorous standard to meet. It's not easy to meet. A lot of cities don't have a designation of assured water supply for that reason. And I think this is really the last one. What's next? So some of these regional partnerships I've talked about, we're working very closely with other cities and SRP on some of these infrastructure partnerships. We're carefully monitoring what's happening on the negotiations for how shortages will work on the Colorado River. We've got some new landscape and water conservation, landscape ordinance recommendations and conservation programs that we're actually, we'll be taking the conservation programs to council this month, and still actively in the works on some new landscape ordinance recommendations. We're always evaluating water rates and whether or not we can adjust those tiers, investing in some very, very exciting and expensive new treatment technologies at our surface water plants to really maximize the water quality that we're providing to our customers. And then we're always doing messaging and public awareness campaigns to make sure that our community understands our water supplies and where they come from and what we're doing to be prepared for drought.
Are there any reclaimed water used in HOA lakes?
Oh, I forgot to mention that. I started going down that road and then I got sidetracked.
And
I'm glad you asked. So all that grass you see and those lakes, the lakes are actually serving a purpose, a very, very important purpose, because
all of the HOAs that have lakes?
in South Chandler?
Yeah.
In South Chandler, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't speak to any other city, but in South Chandler, the reason you see so many lakes is because in the reclaim system, we don't maintain the same level of pressure in that distribution system that we do in our drinking water system. So when you turn on the tap or turn on the shower, you're getting 60 PSI coming at you, right? You're getting good high pressure water. In our reclaim system, we didn't design it that way because it's not necessary for irrigation, right? So the way that it works is because generally the timing of when they're irrigating a golf course or a park or a common area in an HOA is not matching sort of the supply that's available in the system. We require them to have a reservoir. Think of it like these big SRP reservoirs, but it's just a little teeny tiny reservoir to irrigate that park or that golf course. So those lakes are their reservoirs. That's the water they use to irrigate their park or school. So they look pretty, but they're actually serving a very important functional purpose.
So there are two lakes, a lot of, lakes in that area, so those are kind of reservoirs, right?
That absolutely 100% of everything watered in the Ocotillo area comes from those lakes. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know if, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Do you know if Arizona Department of Water Resources has any knowledge of being able to communicate well with California and the Colorado River? Because there was some, at one point we couldn't get California to the table, but that was before all the rain and the flooding they had.
Yeah.
And that's the last I heard of it. And I don't know if you have any knowledge of that or what's going on.
So the negotiation, the interstate negotiations, so I mentioned, one thing that's great about SRP is it's all just within Arizona. So we don't have to fight with any other states or any other countries about who gets to use it and how much. And whereas with the Colorado River, whenever you get 7 states and 2 countries sharing a water supply, there's gonna be some discussions. Arizona and California do not have a great history of collaborating on the Colorado River. There's many Supreme Court decisions and lawsuits and compacts, and so we have a long history of not agreeing on how to share shortages on the Colorado River. That has been really, this most recent process has put a spotlight on that sort of relationship. I'm an eternal optimist, and I do really believe, so we're coming up into this very important period. Between now and 2026, all of the states have to agree on how to share shortages, because there's an important deadline that expires in 2026.
Or the feds step in, government steps in there. Right?
Yeah, they threaten to, but they actually really don't want to. They really don't want to do that, so they do a lot of threatening to step in. But they don't actually seem to do it.
Okay.
They just do it to try to get us to all come to an agreement, right? So a lot of those efforts had been going on. They weren't very productive, mostly because Arizona and California were doing a lot of this. Having a good winter sort of took the pressure cooker off of that, right? So we were not headed in a good direction, and then all of a sudden Mother Nature helped us out and said, here's a great winter. You guys can work together now. And that really did help a lot with taking the pressure off and giving it, because very short deadlines are not helpful for a collaborative environment. In order to really work together and work through some of the very, very complex issues, and these are complex legal issues, you need time, right? Well, so that good winter, it bought us some time. So they now have a couple years to figure all this out. I'm not directly involved in those negotiations. I hear it's going much better now, and that we can all have hope that we're gonna find some collaborative solutions before 2026.
All right, thanks.
You know what, I've got one back here, so.
Okay, I love that Chandler is secure, but I go to work other areas too, and I recently picked up my license in Payson, and the people that live there say that the Pine Strawberry area was all over the news, but they say that it's kind of under control because the people took it back. but they say the infrastructure is just horrific and they need to improve their infrastructure because our water capture, we could be more self-sustaining if we get our reservoirs right, and if we get our water capture and our underground piping correct, and we don't sell alfalfa fields in other parts of our state to Saudi Arabia. I mean, I don't just work Chandler. I'm so grateful I live in Chandler, and it seems like we're doing a good job. But all these other areas, I get buyers from all over who have concerns. What, can you speak to the infrastructure that could also make us more self-sustainable, even without the Colorado? And, you know, the piping up north when we get good snow and we shouldn't let it overrun. Can you talk to any of that?
So I'm not super familiar with the infrastructure in the Payson area, and I'm sorry, but I really can't knowledgeably speak to that. What I can tell you is that one thing that's very important to understand, and if I had a client that was looking at locating in Chandler or even just in the Phoenix area in general that's coming from a different area of the state, one thing that I think is very helpful to explain to them is that the central part of Arizona, in 1980, they designated it as what's called an active management area. There's an active management area in the Tucson area. There's an active management area in the Prescott area, and there's an active management area, call them AMAs because it's a mouthful, kind of around the whole Phoenix metro area, right? And what does that really mean? What it means is that 40 plus years ago, we got very, very serious about the state, through regulatory requirements, got very, very serious about requiring anyone in these areas to not use groundwater, to prove to the state. That's what this assured water supply designation is all about, to prove to the state that we've secured enough surface water rights through the Colorado, through SRP. We can even reclaimed water is a renewable supply. If you build the infrastructure to use it, it's a renewable supply. So what's not a renewable supply is groundwater. And so I'm going to tell you that the areas of the state that are outside this active management area, where groundwater is not regulated, and they haven't had this regulatory structure in place for 40 plus years.
Do we have protection in Chandler from not selling our water supply to Saudi Arabia? Do we have any stopgaps in our town of Chandler not to do that kind of thing? Because
absolutely. So all of the land in Chandler is managed by the municipal water provider, and we certainly don't let anyone come in and just drill a well in Chandler. You can't do that.
Or buy a field and start
they're buying agriculture.
Well, you can buy a field, but the question is where are you going to get your water from? You can't drill a well.
Okay.
We're not going to.
I just wanted to know, that seemed a little nefarious to me, and I don't want Chandler to adopt that same.
Well, I think the thing you have to understand is the context of what's happening in the media regarding the controversy around some of the foreign investment, agricultural investment.
Yeah.
That's all occurring outside of active management areas.
Okay.
That's occurring in areas where groundwater is not regulated. That's the difference.
Okay, good.
So County Island is not active management area.
No, it is. Even if it's a county, so the whole entire Phoenix area, the Pinal area in between Phoenix and Tucson and all of Tucson, that's all active management areas. You cannot, you have to prove that you have surface water supplies. You can't just pump groundwater unsustainably in an active management area.
Yeah.
What is that, how far does that go, like east? Because it looked like that yellow thing wasn't where I live.
So the yellow area is a very small area of the land that has access to surface water supplies from the Salt and Verde rivers.
But do you know the border, like for how far east that goes?
Specifically with surface water supplies to SRP.
Yeah.
It goes all the way out to Avondale on the west side and
east side.
Chandler Mesa Gilbert on the east side.
Okay.
So
like Apache Junction.
No, Apache Junction does not have access to surface water supplies from the Salt and Verde system. Apache Junction has Colorado River supplies.
Yeah.
But
Gold Canyon, Florence, and Santan Valley.
no SRP.
That's Pinal County.
Concrete.
No SRP.
But are they active management areas?
But they're in active management areas. So these are two different things, right? The active management areas are very big, and I'm happy to share with you a link on the Department of Water Resources website where you can see the map of the active management areas. They're very, very big. It's a very large portion of the central part of the state. It's not some of the rural areas, right? But it's the the more urban areas in the central part of the state, pretty much all the way from Phoenix to
Is that the
Tucson.
37%? Is that the one coming from the Colorado and all that?
What an active management area is it's a region of the state where the state is regulating groundwater pumping, which means you cannot just run off groundwater. You have to have access to some surface water
So if
supplies.
you don't, then they don't have the underground, is what you're saying.
If you are a city in an active management, so for example, you asked me about Apache Junction, Queen Creek, there were a few that you threw out there. They are in an active management area, and they have to prove that they have surface water supplies. They don't have SRP surface water supplies, but they do have Colorado
okay.
River surface supplies. So they have to prove that they're not pumping groundwater unsustainably.
Thank you. Could you please talk to your relationship with developers when they come in and they buy land from county islands, or let's call them Maricopa County jurisdiction? What are your policies and relationships around the 100-year assurance water with these developers as they come in, and then you come in and annex those county islands on county
So you're
land?
I'll do my best. You're getting a little bit outside my area of expertise on that one. I can tell you that Chandler as a water provider, and I don't want to steal Ryan's time here, so I'm giving this over to you in a second. Chandler as a water provider, the municipal water provider. So there's City of Chandler, where we are the water provider for the vast majority of the City of Chandler, but there are pieces of the City of Chandler, like the Sun Lakes area, we are not the water provider. There's a private water provider in Sun Lakes. There's a couple little county islands here and there where we do not provide water. There's people that are in those county islands that have made their own personal decision that they want to continue to use their groundwater wells. Those wells are kind of grandfathered in. They're so old, they kind of, you get grandfathered in, that you're not kind of under the same regulatory structure if you're in one of those places where you've had a well for a really long time. So how things work really depends on who's the water provider, right? We're the water provider in some county islands and some we're not. How things work with whether or not the city decides to annex that in, that's kind of outside my area of expertise. I don't know all the answers to those
But it
questions.
seems like you benefit from the water the farmers give to the developers as you annex those areas, right? You kind of get access to the water.
Okay, I think I understand your question. So some of those county islands, it sort of, again, everything in water, it depends. That's usually what every answer starts with. But it depends on whether or not that county island is still, prior to being developed, is historically used agriculturally.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking about a county island and someone wants to come in and develop it, and then right now it's just a big agricultural field, and they're still irrigating crops on that agricultural field, they have what's called historic, well, it's not called historic. They are historic rights, but they're these irrigated grandfathered rights that are kind of grandfathered in. And those rights, at least in Chandler, those rights are irrigation rights from SRP. So they're not getting served water by the City of Chandler. If it's an old agricultural field, they've got an SRP irrigation ditch close to that property, and they're taking raw, untreated SRP water off that irrigation ditch, and they're using it to irrigate their field. In that case, if a developer wants to come in and develop that piece of land, then if that happens, then when it happens, then that old irrigation right that was previously on that land, that would get cut over to the city and give the city more surface water supplies in the salt and Verde system. So that's how that works. Maybe, is that?
That's perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, isn't Chandler's pretty like landlocked? Like I went to a Chandler, they were 96% or something built out.
Yeah.
So it's not like Goodyear or Mesa
Right.
D.R. Horton coming in with thousands of houses. Like just to make
True.
people feel safer. It's not like you're going to have these big developments taking.
Yeah,
So
Chandler's like 95% built out.
lucky that-
We're landlocked and mostly
Yeah.
done with development. We've
Yeah.
definitely got a little bit more,
Just to put everybody at ease a little bit.
commercial development. There's still a few pieces of land that are pockets that are planned for commercial development, but a lot of our residential development is built out. You guys need to help me on time and you tell me what.
I mean, you still have 45 minutes, or Ryan does.
Well, yeah, I know you have a meeting we have to get to, so maybe.
Yeah, maybe like one more question?
Yeah.
So my last question is Chandler going to change the rules so that any more apartments that are built actually have to prove there's enough water? Because I know that for single family they have to, but apartments do not.
So, I'm not exactly sure what you're referencing, but let me see if I can answer your question this way. In Chandler, the way that we plan is we have a general plan that lays out the community's involved in, obviously city council, everyone's involved in this general plan that lays out the vision for growth in the city. You know, what land is going to develop where and how, and what are the intended uses of that land. We take that, so when I say we, I mean in the municipal water side of things, the water utility, we take that general plan and then we create our own utility master plan. And it takes the general plan and where all the different land is and how it's intended to be used, and we make sure that from an infrastructure and a water resources perspective, that we have enough water to serve that land for its intended use that's been planned and approved by the community and the council and the land use planning department. So if there is land in Chandler that is planned to be used for, in our general plan, for residential or commercial, we've already planned the water resources for that land, and so there's no need to prove anything. Now, outside of Chandler, that's different. And the reason that's different is because not everybody has a designation of assured water supply, right? So if you go to areas around the state that are in an active management area and that city doesn't have a designation of assured water supply, then whoever wants to develop that apartment complex or house or whatever it is, they have to prove they have water. Nobody in Chandler has to prove anything because we as the city have already proven it, right? We've already proven to the state we have water. So there's no necessity to request a certificate of assured water supply or anything. Our designation covers our entire service area, and so all development that occurs within our service area is covered under that designation, that we already have the water. We've proven we have the water for our build-out condition, not just today, but build-out.
Even if it changes zoning?
If it changes zoning, depending on what it changes from, that could potentially pose a problem, right? If in our general plan, it's zoned for office use, that's very low water use. And someone wants to come in and make it a 10-story apartment complex with 600, 700 units, that's going to use a lot more water than what we planned the water for, right? So that's where difficult decisions need to be made about.
So you would have,
that are not my decision, thank goodness.
So your department would have some say in development then, if it had an impact?
That would be a city council decision. So if someone wants to come in and change the land use from what's in the general plan and make it something different, we could advise what the water resources were that were planned for that parcel, but ultimately it would go to city council to decide whether they want to approve that change in zoning.
Okay.
So would a place like Rio Verde not have had a designated assured water supply?
Rio Verde is an interesting one. Not only do they not have anything close to a designation of assured water supply, they don't even have a water provider. So that's the problem. And so one of the things about being in an active management area is that the assured water supply program protects homeowners from exactly that thing happening. But the reason that Rio Verde happened is there was a little loophole in the assured water supply program that said, right now, the assured water supply program says that if you're going to subdivide into more than 6, if you plat more than 6, then you have to prove your water. You have to either, if you're in an active management area that has a designated provider, then that's your proof, right? If you're not, then you have to prove that you have the water. You have to go and get in with what's called a certificate of assured water supply. But you only have to get that certificate if you're subdividing into 6 or more. And all of those, they call those wildcat subdivisions. Those all divided in such a way where they kind of got through this loophole where it wasn't 6 or more, and so there was no need to prove an assured water supply. So they kind of lucked out that their neighbor, Scottsdale, was being generous for a long time and letting them take water out of the Scottsdale standpipe. But then when shortages hit on the Colorado River, Scottsdale said, you need to find another solution. We can't do that for you forever, right? That's kind of what happened there. I think I got to give Ryan the stage here, but thank you so much.